Okay, so I wanted to go through the table that you had to do on your lab because I had a number of students that had trouble with this. So we started out with runner 1 and they had these values filled in for us. And then they had, whoops. Okay, so it said now that we are going to open the parachute, which means we are going to slow down by 1 meter per second each second. So if we start at 8, then we'd slow down by 1, slow down by 1 more. Okay, so eventually I get to the point where I have no velocity, which means now I'm stopped. So after this, I continue to have no velocity and no acceleration. All right, now we have to get our positions. So we are going to use this equation, and if I have no acceleration, then I don't have an acceleration term. So I take my initial velocity, which was 8, and I'm going to go for 1 second. So that means I'm going to be at 8. So I started out at a position of -30. And if I add 8, I'm going to be at -22. And then I'm going to continue another 8 and another 8. Okay, so we did good at that part. Now what happens is I start to have an acceleration. Okay, so I started out at 8. After 1 second, I'm going to have an acceleration -1. That's 1 second squared. So I'm going to 8, and then 1/2 times -1 is -1/2, which means I've now gone 7.5. So if I started out with -6 as my position, and I now added 7.5, I would be at a position of 1.5. Okay, so now I have a velocity of 7 after 1 second. And I'm still have an acceleration of -1. Okay, so now instead of 7.5, I get 6.5. So it means I'm going to add 6.5 onto this position. So if I have 1.5 and I add 6.5, I'm going to get 8. Okay, so if this difference was 7.5, this difference is 6.5, I can kind of see what my trend is going to be. So now I'm going to go add 5.5. Then I'm going to add 4.5. Then I'm going to add 3.5. Then I'm going to add 2.5. Then I'm going to add 1.5. And then I'm going to add 1/2. Okay, and at this point I've stopped. So I'm not going to be going any more position. My position is now going to stay the same. Okay, so for runner 2, no acceleration because I'm going a constant velocity of 2 meters per second. After 1 second, I will have gone 2 meters. And they started at the starting line. So I started at a position of 0. After 1 second, I've gone 2 meters. After another second, 4. And continue that trend. All the way down. Okay, So one of the questions that they asked you is how far apart are the runners, like who's ahead and by how much at a time of 8 seconds. So at a time of 8 seconds, I have one runner at 16 and the other one at 21 and a half. So runner one is still ahead, and they are ahead by the difference between 21 and a half and 16. Okay, then the other question that they ask is when are they going to be at the same position? Well, that's down here at time of 13 seconds. Now, some of you had rounded numbers that you used over here. So a lot of people had, instead of 1.5, you had 1 and then 7, and then you would have had 12 and 16. So it makes those values off a little bit if you round. But if you round at 8 seconds, your positions are going to be slightly different. You're going to find out that they are only about 3 meters ahead. And then the point where they get to the same position ends up to be at about 10 meters. So it makes those values a little different. And if you rounded those numbers, I didn't take off for those, but these are what we would get with the unrounded numbers.